Rich but politically fragmented Gaul was not only a lure for Rome. The rivals of the best conquerors of antiquity had already penetrated this country and spread their influence there. Gaius Julius Caesar, who began the great conquests, had to face not only with the Gauls, but also with the Germans. This dangerous enemy had once already hurt the Romans, and was ready for war now. Gaul, densely populated and rich in resources, had a fatal weakness: a lack of political unity. Internal conflicts prevented them from pulling together and fighting back against warlike neighbors. Moreover, the Gauls themselves invited foreign warriors for service and as allies in feuds. Shortly before Caesar's campaigns, a territorial dispute broke out between large Gallic tribes. The Aedui were at war against the Arverni and the Sequanians. The latter invited the leader of the Germanic tribe of Sviva, Ariovistus, a skillful and dexterous commander. The new ally readily led the Germans from the lands beyond the Rhine. At the Battle of Magdeburg, about 15,000 Germanic Ariovistus defeated the Aedui and turned them into their tribute. This victory, however, was not long to be rejoiced over by the Sequans who had invited Ariovistus. The Germans occupied a third of their best land and demanded more for the arriving tribesmen. As so often happens in history, the mercenaries wanted to stay. As Caesar himself wrote in his Notes on the Gallic War, Ariovistus wanted to establish in Gaul his kingdom, settling there 120,000 people. The leader of the Aedui Diviciac went to Rome and asked the Senate for military assistance against the Germans and the Celtic tribe Helvetes. Previously, Caesar had planned to use the forces of Ariovistus as a support in Gaul, but now the position became even more convenient. He could come to the Gauls as a liberator and, with their support, gain a foothold in their lands. In short, he could do what Ariovistus himself had done. So the Aedui became a friend of the Roman people and an ally of Caesar, and it was not long before they realized the real danger of Roman aid. But at the beginning of the campaign, everything was going well. In the summer, Caesar defeated the Helvetians and drove them out, was well received by the Aedui, was able to recruit auxiliary units and about 4,000 Gallic cavalrymen. Caesar had 6 more legions. In all, he could employ about 40,000 men against the Germanics. Negotiations with Ariovistus did not succeed. The leader of the Suevians did not give up his plans for colonization. Already in the first clash, it became clear that Caesar, a commander still a novice, will have to fight with a more experienced opponent. The meeting with the Germans occurred near Besançon, the capital of the Sequans, which Ariovistus wanted to occupy. The Germanic leader maneuvered without engaging in decisive combat. His cavalry and light infantry, mobile and familiar with the terrain, sought to disrupt Roman communications and deprive them of food supplies from the Sequans. Caesar's Gaulish cavalry could not stop the Germanic raids. This art of wearing down the enemy, keep him in suspense and torture constant small attacks Germanic will demonstrate many times and in subsequent wars. Deprived of supplies, shabby army when attacked in a good place could be defeated. But once on the plain, the Roman army had the advantage. Here Caesar called Ariovistus in open combat, and his evasions raised the spirit of the legionaries, who saw them as a sign of weakness. To secure the supply routes, Caesar had to allocate part of the forces, and the rest could now be directed at the camp Ariovistus. Judging by the further actions of the Germans, their numbers were small and did not surpass the Romans, although the army was replenished by immigrants. For the decisive clash of the parties were preparing for several days. Took place near the Vosges Mountains. Having lined up the army in 3 lines, Caesar launched an attack on the Germanic camp. The warriors of Ariovistus came out, organized by tribes, and hastily built a Wagenburg, a barrier of wagons, preventing the retreat and the impact of enemy cavalry from the rear. The Romans trumpeted the signal to attack and moved forward. The Germans, in turn, rushed at the enemy so frantically that the sides did not even have time, as usual, to throw spears at each other. With this attack, Ariovistus did not allow the Romans to attack, finally and correctly for this purpose built. The Germanic onslaught crushed Caesar's left flank, but the impetus of their attack soon weakened, the Romans held firm. Caesar kept the reserve, and Publius Crassus led the actions of the third line of troops on the left flank. Supporting the flank, the reserve pressed the Germans, and they were turned into flight. Caesar described the bravery of the legionaries at the climax of the battle. Of our soldiers, there were many who threw themselves on the phalanx of the Germans, pulled back the shields with their hands, and inflicted wounds on the enemies from above. Victory at the Battle of Vosges decided the outcome of the war. All the enemy turned to flight and ceased only when they reached the Rhine River about 5 miles away. There only a very few, in the hope of their strength, attempted to swim to the other bank or were saved in boats that were found there. Ariovistus, with the remnants of his army, went back to where he had come from more than 10 years before. All his ambitious plans had collapsed. He waged war skillfully, but under conditions more favorable to the enemy. The famous military historian Hans Delbrück assessed it this way: Ariovistus was probably not only a major but also a brilliant strategist. He faced a more talented commander and therefore died. The qualities of the Roman army also played their part. Caesar encouraged the legionaries, pointing out their superiority and the shortcomings of the Germans. Do not be afraid of their onslaught, their high stature and loud shouting. So far no one's voice has killed people. They with their physical strength will not be able to do anything more than us, since they have exactly the same hands as we do, but they can suffer much more, since they are large and lightly armed. Their onslaught is at first unbridled and bold, but it easily runs out and does not long retain its force. Thanks to their armament and training, the legionaries in hand-to-hand combat did not yield to the Germans, withstood and won. After the expulsion of Ariovistus, Gauls were left alone against the Romans. Having enlisted their aid against a mercenary whom they themselves had let in because of internal strife, they now had Caesar, an invader far more powerful. And Rome was spared competition with the Germans for Gaul for a time. Later, tribes beyond the Rhine would again try to penetrate that province. For the Romans, it would be a bloody struggle with small gains and heavy defeats. Roman military prowess was at its peak, while that of the Germans was beginning to gain strength, only to be revealed a few decades later.